Rain was still dripping off my hair when they rolled me through the emergency room doors. I didn't see it, but I heard pieces of it later, fragments that came to me in flashes during those first confusing days of recovery. The paramedic shouting vitals, his voice cracking with urgency as he rattled off numbers that meant nothing to me, but everything to the trauma team waiting inside. The nurse asking about blood type, her tone professional, but laced with that particular kind of controlled panic that medical professionals learn to mask. The metallic rattle of a stretcher wheel that didn't want to cooperate, squeaking against the linoleum like a mechanical complaint against the chaos unfolding around it. Tuesday night, drunk driver ran a red light and T-boned my car on the driver's side. I never saw him coming. One moment I was driving home from a late shift, the radio playing something soft and forgettable, my mind already drifting toward the book I wanted to read before bed. The next moment, there was nothing. No sound, no pain, no flash of headlights warning me what was about to happen. Just darkness, sudden and absolute, like someone had reached into my life and flipped a switch I didn't know existed. They told me I was unconscious when I arrived. Internal bleeding, severe concussion, possible ruptured spleen, my heart rate unstable, blood pressure dropping like a stone in still water. The trauma team moved fast, civilian hospital, bright lights, no time for paperwork. In those first critical minutes, I was just a body, a collection of injuries and symptoms that needed immediate attention. The surgeon on call was a man named Dr. Harrison, someone I would later learn had seen combat zones and emergency rooms in 12 different countries. He didn't hesitate. He didn't wait for insurance approval or family consultation. He just started working, his hands steady, his voice calm as he directed the chaos around him like a conductor leading an orchestra through a piece they'd never rehearsed. But there was only so much he could do without consent, without authorization for the procedures that would actually save my life. The surgeon called my emergency contact. That would be my sister. Cassidy arrived 25 minutes later. She came straight from a dinner party, some charity function or another that she'd been hosting for people who liked to be seen caring about causes they couldn't name. I know that because the nurse later mentioned the smell of expensive perfume mixed with red wine when she leaned over my bed. It was a specific combination, one that the nurse recognized from years of working nights in a hospital where wealthy families came to visit relatives they barely knew. Mitchell was with her, still wearing a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. They didn't look scared. They looked inconvenienced. There's a difference, and anyone who has spent time in a hospital waiting room knows exactly what I mean. Fear looks like desperate eyes, like clutching hands, like questions that tumble out too fast to answer. Inconvenience looks like checking a watch, like scanning for the nearest exit, like the particular kind of tight-lipped expression that says this wasn't in the schedule. The trauma surgeon explained the situation clearly. He didn't sugarcoat it, didn't hide behind medical jargon or euphemisms designed to soften the blow. I needed immediate surgery. It was specialized, complicated, the kind of procedure that required a level of expertise that not every hospital could provide. Estimated cost around $150,000. Without it, survival odds were low. With it, there was a strong chance I would recover fully, or at least well enough to live a normal life. The numbers were stark, the options limited, and time was running out with every passing minute. Mitchell asked about insurance before he asked about my condition. His voice was smooth, controlled, the voice of a man who had spent his life negotiating deals and calculating risks. The surgeon told him my health insurance would cover a portion, but not all. There would be out-of-pocket costs, significant ones, and my parents were co-signers on some of my older civilian financial accounts. Billing would likely involve them, would likely become a conversation that extended beyond the hospital walls into family dinners and holiday gatherings for years to come. Cassidy's first question wasn't about my pain level or neurological response. It wasn't about whether I was conscious, whether I could hear them, whether there was any chance I might wake up and make this decision for myself. Instead, she asked, "What are the chances she'll fully recover?" Her voice was measured, almost clinical, as if she were discussing a defective product rather than her own sister. The surgeon said there was risk. There's always risk. Brain injuries are unpredictable. the human brain a landscape that even the most experienced neurologists navigate with humility. I might need rehabilitation. There could be cognitive therapy, months of recovery, the possibility that the person who woke up wouldn't be quite the same as the one who had been driving home on that rainy Tuesday night. It depended on how quickly they operated, on factors no one could fully control or predict. But the alternative was death. That much was certain. Mitchell pulled Cassidy aside. They didn't go far, just a few feet away from my bed. Close enough that a nurse could hear parts of it, close enough that their voices carried in the quiet urgency of the trauma bay. Money, liability, long-term care. They asked about power of attorney, about who would make decisions if I couldn't. They asked about medical directives, about whether I had ever expressed wishes about end-of-life care. And then they asked about my mental state. They asked whether I had any existing depressive history. That one caught the nurse's attention. She looked up from her chart, her pen pausing mid-note because it seemed like an odd question in that moment. A woman was dying on the table in front of them, and they were asking about her psychiatric history. I did not have a depressive history, but Cassidy answered anyway. "She's always been fragile," she said. "She struggles. She doesn't handle stress well." That was news to me. While I was bleeding internally, while my body was fighting to stay alive against odds that grew worse by the minute, my sister was rewriting my personality. She was constructing a narrative that would serve her purposes, painting a picture of a woman too delicate for this world, too unstable to make rational decisions about her own survival. Surgeon pressed again. Time was critical. They needed consent for surgery, needed someone to sign the forms that would allow them to crack open my chest and stop the bleeding that was slowly draining the life from my body. And that's when Cassidy remembered something useful. 2 months before the accident, our grandfather passed away. He was a quiet man, a Navy veteran who had served his country in wars he rarely talked about and came home to a life that asked nothing more of him than quiet dignity. He left me a $300,000 life insurance policy. He said it was because I was the only one who visited him without asking for something, the only one who sat with him on his porch and listened to his stories about places I'd never see and experiences I'd never have. Cassidy had been furious about that. She had shown up at his funeral in designer black, dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief she probably borrowed from a magazine spread, and she had walked away with nothing but the memory of a grandfather who saw through her. But apparently, she wasn't furious anymore. The nurse later said she watched Cassidy's face change when the insurance policy came up in conversation with Mitchell. Not shocked, not emotional, not even surprised. Calculating. There was a shift in her expression, a subtle rearrangement of features that transformed her from a concerned sister into something else entirely. She became a woman who had just been handed a solution to problems I didn't even know she had. The math was simple, the logic brutal. A dead sister was worth $300,000. A live sister was a liability, a collection of medical bills and ongoing costs, and the complicated burden of someone who might need help for months or years. Cassidy asked the surgeon to step outside the room. She requested a private conversation, her voice taking on that tone of reasonable authority she had perfected over years of charity boards and social obligations. They stood in the hallway, under fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly ill, and Mitchell crossed his arms like a man settling in for a negotiation he already knew he would win. Cassidy lowered her voice, but not enough. The nurse who stood nearby, pretending to organize supplies, heard every word. She wouldn't want to live on machines. Cassidy said calmly, "She's always said that." That was a lie. I have never said that. I have never had a conversation with my sister about end-of-life care, about what I would want if I were unconscious and unable to speak for myself. She was inventing a version of me that fit her needs, creating a fiction that would justify the decision she had already made. "She's depressed," she continued. "She struggled her whole life. It would be cruel to keep her alive just to suffer." Another lie. I wasn't depressed. I wasn't struggling. I was living a life that made me happy, a life that didn't look like hers but was no less valid for its differences. But in that hallway, under those harsh lights, my sister was building a case for my death, and she was using my own supposed weaknesses as the foundation. The surgeon pushed back. He was a man who had seen too much death to accept it easily, who had fought too many battles against the odds to surrender without resistance. He said I was young. I had strong vitals before the crash. I was a good candidate for surgery, the kind of patient who might surprise everyone with a full recovery. This wasn't a hopeless case. This wasn't someone whose body had already given up, whose systems were shutting down in that slow, inevitable cascade that medicine could only delay. This was a woman with a chance, and he wasn't willing to let that chance slip away without a fight. Mitchell stepped in then, his voice smooth and reasonable, the voice of a man who had learned to make terrible things sound practical. "What's the quality of life if something goes wrong?" he asked. "Are we talking permanent damage?" The surgeon answered honestly because honesty was all he had left. "There is risk," he said, "but without surgery she will die." It was that simple, that stark, and it hung in the air between them like a challenge. Cassidy didn't hesitate. She didn't need to think about it, didn't need to weigh options or consider what I might have wanted. She had already decided, had probably decided the moment she heard about the insurance money. Then she wouldn't want extraordinary measures, she said. She told me that. She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't look at the body on the bed, at the sister who had trusted her with the most important decision of her life. She looked at the surgeon, at the forms in his hand, at the bureaucratic machinery that would make her decision official. The hospital required formal documentation. As next of kin, Cassidy had authority in the absence of a spouse or existing directive. They brought out the paperwork, the forms that would make it legal, that would protect them from liability and make my death official. Do not resuscitate, DNR, 3 letters that would end my life. The nurse later told investigators that Cassidy's hand didn't shake. Not once. She signed it cleanly, her handwriting neat and precise, as if she were signing for a package delivery or approving a dinner reservation. Full legal name, Cassidy Vance. Mitchell watched the signature like he was approving a contract, his eyes tracking the movement of the pen, calculating what those strokes of ink would mean for his bottom line. The surgeon made one final attempt. He spoke directly to Cassidy, woman to woman, sister to sister. "If we don't operate, she will likely code within hours." Cassidy nodded. She understood. They all understood. "We understand," she said, and her voice was steady, her face composed. They declined the surgery. They chose the payout. While machines kept me stable for the moment, while my body fought to stay alive through nothing more than stubborn biological determination, my own sister signed paperwork that removed aggressive intervention. If my heart stopped, they were not to restart it. No intubation beyond current support. No advanced life-saving measures. She decided my life was worth less than $300,000. Here's what makes it worse. She didn't even pretend to cry. She didn't sit by my bedside holding my hand, didn't whisper apologies or prayers or promises to make this right. She walked into the waiting room with Mitchell, ordered coffee from the vending machine, and started discussing how to manage the funds responsibly. That's what the nurse heard. Manage the funds. My grandfather's insurance policy would pay out quickly in the event of accidental death. No delays, no investigations, clean paperwork, dead sister, clean money. They talked about investments, about paying off debts, about the ways this tragedy could be transformed into opportunity. And I lay in the next room, unconscious and unaware, my life measured out in the minutes I had left. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a room where people decided your value without you being conscious enough to defend yourself? Have you ever trusted someone with your life, only to realize they were doing math instead of praying? The betrayal wasn't just in the decision itself. It was in the ease of it, the casual efficiency with which my sister calculated my worth and found me wanting. She didn't struggle with it. She didn't lose sleep. She didn't even have the decency to feel guilty. She just made the call, signed the papers, and moved on to planning how to spend the money. That's the part that stays with me, even now, even after everything that happened. The ease of it. The way murder can look so much like bureaucracy when you wrap it in the right language. Back in that hospital room, my vitals began to fluctuate. Blood loss continued, my body slowly giving up the fight it had been waging since the moment of impact. The trauma team monitored me closely, but their hands were tied by the DNR order and refusal of surgery. They could stabilize, they could observe, but they could not escalate without legal override. The nurse who had been with me since I arrived stood by the monitors, her jaw tight with the particular frustration of someone who has the skills to help but not the permission. She watched the numbers tick down, each fluctuation a small defeat in a battle she wasn't allowed to fight. Cassidy came back into the room once. She stood at the foot of the bed, looked at the machines, looked at me. No tears, no hesitation, just impatience. Mitchell checked his watch. Somewhere else in the city, other people were going about their Tuesday nights, completely unaware that a woman was dying because her family had decided she wasn't worth saving. The heart monitor started to slow. A nurse called out for the surgeon, her voice sharp with the kind of controlled urgency that medical professionals learn in their first week. My blood pressure dropped again. Cassidy didn't move closer. She didn't hold my hand. She didn't whisper goodbye or tell me she was sorry or promise that she would remember me. She waited, her arms crossed, her expression bored, as if she were waiting for a delayed flight rather than watching her sister die. The steady electronic tones stretched longer and longer between beats, each silence a small death, each resumption a borrowed moment. The sound in that room shifted from chaotic movement to something thin and continuous, a flat, unbroken signal that meant the heart had given up its fight. Somewhere outside the hospital, cutting through the rain-heavy night air, another sound began to rise. Loud, rhythmic, mechanical helicopter blades. That flat tone was still ringing when the rotor wash hit the hospital roof. It was 2:00 a.m. The night shift nurse had already called the time once when my heart rhythm thinned out again. The trauma team stood in a tight circle around my bed, their faces masks of professional frustration. They were preparing to follow the signed order. No escalation, no advanced measures. If my body shut down, they would step back. Paperwork over pulse. That's what it came down to in the end. A signature on a form, a decision made by someone who stood to gain from my death, and a team of medical professionals forced to watch because the law said they had no choice. Cassidy and Mitchell were in the waiting room down the hall. A vending machine coffee sat between them, steam rising from the cheap cups they held. Cassidy had kicked off her heels and was scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by the blue light of the screen. Mitchell had a notepad out. He was already calculating mortgage payoff, new SUV, investment opportunities. That's what the security camera later showed. Two people planning their financial future while their sister lay dying in the next room. Back in the ICU, the surgeon hesitated. Even with the DNR, it didn't sit right. I was 29 years old. No terminal illness, no documented psychiatric history, no medical directive on file except the one Cassidy had just signed. But rules are rules in civilian hospitals. A nurse reached toward the ventilator controls, her hand shaking slightly, and that's when the building shook. The automatic ER doors downstairs burst open so hard they slammed against the walls. A violent gust of wind tore through the entrance hallway, knocking over a potted plant and sending intake forms flying across the floor. The security guard didn't have time to react. 24 military police in full tactical gear flooded the lobby, helmets, body armor, rifles slung tight. No hesitation, no confusion. They moved like they already knew the layout, like they had studied the blueprints and walked through these halls in their minds 100 times before tonight. The charge nurse tried to step forward, her voice cutting through the sudden chaos. "Sir, this is a hospital." An MP held up a badge. "Federal operation. Secure the floor." Within seconds, elevators were locked. Stairwells were sealed. Hospital staff were instructed to remain in place. Calm, controlled. No yelling, no chaos. Just immediate authority that swept through the building like a tide. Cassidy stood up so fast she spilled coffee on her dress. The brown liquid spread across the expensive fabric, staining what had probably been a carefully chosen outfit for a night that was supposed to end with champagne and profit. Mitchell looked at the MPs and went pale. "What is this?" Cassidy demanded. Her voice was shrill, panicked, the voice of a woman who had never been told no by anyone she couldn't charm or ignore. No one answered her. Upstairs in the ICU corridor, the double doors flew open, and General David Arrington walked in. Full dress uniform, 4 stars on each shoulder, not ceremonial, not for show. He looked like a man who had been pulled out of bed and chosen violence instead of patience. His face was hard, his eyes scanning the room with the particular intensity of someone who had seen war and was prepared to bring a piece of it here if necessary. The civilian surgeon stepped into his path. "Sir, this is a restricted area." Arrington didn't slow down. "She has a DNR," the surgeon said quickly. "Her sister signed." Arrington shoved a classified document onto the nurse's station hard enough to rattle the clipboard holders. "That DNR is void," he said. His voice was steady but carried across the entire hallway, filling the silence that had fallen over the gathered staff. "Federal override under National Security Authority." The nurse stared at the seal. Department of Defense. Immediate medical custody transfer. The surgeon blinked. "Sir, I don't understand." "You don't need to," Arrington replied. "This woman is a high-ranking intelligence officer assigned to Joint Special Operations Command. Her life is a matter of national security." Silence hit the hallway like a physical force. The nurse who had been adjusting my ventilator froze. The surgeon looked back at my chart like it had personally betrayed him. Arrington pointed at me. "Stabilize her, now." Two military medics moved in fast. Different energy than the civilian team. Precise, efficient, no debate. They replaced lines, administered medication, reassessed internal bleeding with the focused intensity of people who had done this in conditions far worse than a civilian hospital. One of them called out updated vitals, and the numbers were already starting to shift, my body responding to the sudden flood of resources that the DNR had denied it. Arrington leaned close enough that I could probably feel the shift in air, even unconscious. "You're not done yet, Major," he said quietly. It was an order, a promise, a lifeline thrown to someone who had already started to let go. Down in the waiting room, Cassidy tried to block an MP from moving past her. "This is ridiculous. My sister is dying. I'm next of kin." The MP didn't even look at her. "You no longer have authority over the patient." Mitchell stepped forward. "We signed legal documents." "Those documents have been superseded," the MP replied. Cassidy's face shifted from outrage to confusion. "What does that mean?" she snapped. But no one was answering her questions anymore. Her authority had evaporated the moment those doors burst open, and she was left standing in a hallway full of people who didn't care about her designer dress, or her dinner party, or the insurance money she had already spent in her mind. Upstairs, my gurney was already moving. The civilian surgeon stood off to the side, stunned, as military medics transferred me onto a specialized transport stretcher. Portable monitors replaced hospital equipment in under 30 seconds. Arrington walked alongside them. "Air evac ready?" he asked. "Yes, sir." The hospital administrator arrived breathless. "General, this is highly irregular." Arrington stopped and faced him. "Doctor, if you prefer paperwork over pulse, that's your call." "But this patient belongs to the United States government." No one argued after that. Outside, the Blackhawk was already on the landing zone, rotor blades chopping through the night, rain whipping sideways across the parking lot. MPs formed a perimeter. Cassidy and Mitchell were pushed back by the wind as they reached the ambulance bay doors. They watched as my stretcher rolled past. Cassidy's eyes locked on my face. For the first time that night, she looked unsure. Mitchell grabbed her arm. "What is happening?" He whispered. She didn't answer. Arrington stepped into the helicopter last. He didn't look at Cassidy. He didn't acknowledge her existence. As far as he was concerned, she had already made her move, and now she would have to live with the consequences. The medics secured me inside. The doors slammed shut. Cassidy stood frozen as the helicopter lifted off. Wind tore at her hair, her dress clung to her legs, her jaw hung open like someone had just canceled a transaction she thought had already cleared. Her perfect plan had been built on one assumption, that I was exactly who she thought I was. She had no idea how wrong she was. The Blackhawk banked hard and disappeared into the dark sky, carrying me toward a future my sister had never anticipated. In the hospital hallway, nurses slowly returned to their stations. MPs withdrew in organized lines. The civilian staff stood in stunned silence, staring at the empty ICU room. The DNR paperwork was still sitting on the nurse's station, now legally meaningless. Cassidy turned to Mitchell. "She's just a translator," she said under her breath. "She works freelance." Mitchell didn't respond. For the first time that night, neither of them was calculating money. They were calculating risk. They were trying to figure out what had just happened, how their carefully constructed plan had fallen apart so completely. Inside the helicopter, my vitals stabilized under military care. Blood pressure corrected, oxygen levels rising, internal bleeding managed long enough for surgical intervention at the secure facility. Arrington sat across from me, arms folded. He wasn't angry. He was patient. He knew this wasn't over. It was just beginning. 3 hours later, I was inside a classified medical wing that did not appear on any public map. Surgeons who handled battlefield trauma worked on me without hesitation. No insurance questions, no family input, no DNR. Just orders. Just the focused efficiency of people whose job was to put soldiers back together and send them back into the fight. Somewhere back in the city, Cassidy was still staring at the empty sky where the helicopter had vanished. And as the turbine roar filled the cabin, drowning out everything else, that relentless mechanical sound carried me forward until it shifted into the sterile hum of fluorescent lights in a secure military recovery room. 3 weeks later, I opened my eyes to fluorescent lights and a ceiling I didn't recognize. The room was quiet. No public hospital noise. No overhead paging, just controlled silence. My left arm was in a sling. My ribs felt like they had been rearranged by a forklift. My head was heavy but clear. That's the thing about concussions. You either wake up confused or you wake up focused. I woke up focused. A uniformed nurse noticed my eyes open and stepped forward. "Welcome back, Major." Major. Good, that meant I was home. A few minutes later, General Arrington walked in. No dramatic entrance this time, just controlled authority. He closed the door behind him. "You were declared critical twice during transport," he said. "You lost a significant amount of blood. Surgery went well. You'll make a full recovery." I nodded once. He studied my face. "Your sister signed a Do Not Resuscitate order. She refused surgery." No pause, no softening of the statement. "For insurance," I said. $300,000. I let that sit for a moment. There was more. Of course there was more. "She and her husband were already discussing distribution of funds before your vitals stabilized. We have statements, security footage." I adjusted myself upright with my good arm. Pain flared. I ignored it. "What else?" Arrington watched me carefully. "Mitchell Vance is under quiet federal observation for irregular Medicare billing. Nothing public yet. Early stage inquiry." That caught my attention. Define irregular. Suspicious equipment contracts, inflated pricing, phantom inventory. So he was greedy. That wasn't new. But greed alone doesn't explain signing your sister's death warrant that fast. I looked at Arrington. "I need a secure terminal." He didn't hesitate. "Already arranged." Within 10 minutes, a hardened Department of Defense laptop was on the adjustable tray over my hospital bed. Air-gapped, encrypted, clean access to federal databases through proper channels. My left arm was useless. My right hand worked fine. I started with Mitchell's company. On paper, it was impressive. Regional medical equipment supplier, contracts with private hospitals, growth charts that looked healthy, clean tax filings. Nothing obvious, too clean. I dug deeper. Shell vendors, repeating invoice numbers, equipment deliveries billed to facilities that didn't exist. Medicare reimbursements triggered by non-existent patient IDs. Classic fraud architecture, but it was layered well. He wasn't sloppy. He'd built a maze. I pivoted to offshore transfers. That's where things started breathing. Small sums first, then larger ones. Cayman Islands routing numbers, best intermediaries, funds broken into manageable pieces reassembled offshore. Mitchell wasn't a millionaire. He was a middleman, and middlemen usually owe someone. I tracked debt markers, private lending sources, high-interest short-term capital injections disguised as consulting fees. He was leveraged. He was desperate. That explains financial fraud. It doesn't explain killing your sister. I opened my civilian LLC records, Sterling Language Consulting, my harmless freelance translator business, the cover identity my family believed, the one they quietly mocked. The filing history looked normal at first glance. Then I saw it. 2 years ago, Mitchell had helped streamline my accounting system. He offered to optimize tax exposure. I let him glance at basic formation documents. Nothing operational, just structure. That was enough. My LLC had been quietly amended, not publicly, internally, through layered vendor contracts and liability attachments. It had become a secondary holding entity, not for assets, for debt. I ran a trace, and there it was. Mitchell's fraudulent equipment purchases, offshore obligations, short-term private loans, all technically anchored to my LLC as the parent guarantor. I stopped typing. That's when it clicked. If federal auditors followed the fraud trail without context, it wouldn't lead to Mitchell. It would lead to me. My civilian company, my name, my signature. And if I happened to be dead from a tragic car accident, even cleaner. I leaned back slowly. Cassidy didn't just want the insurance payout. She wanted silence. A dead sister can't contest corporate liability. A dead sister can't testify. A dead sister can't defend herself when Medicare fraud charges surface. I reopened the ER timeline. Drunk driver Tuesday night random, maybe not. I pulled the accident report. The driver had prior DUIs, suspended license. Blood alcohol content well above legal limit. He claimed he didn't see the red light. Convenient. I requested vehicle telemetry data. Impact angles suggested he never braked. That didn't prove orchestration, but it didn't prove innocence either. I returned to the financial web. Mitchell's offshore lenders were growing impatient. Escalating interest penalties, threat markers encoded in language. He needed liquidity fast. $300,000 would stabilize his immediate exposure. My death would eliminate the federal liability risk. Cassidy signed the DNR because it solved two problems at once: money and blame. I opened a deeper transfer log, encrypted layer hidden beneath routine vendor payments. That's where the real numbers lived. Large consolidated transfers routed through my LLC's credentials, timestamped while I was deployed overseas. Impossible for me to have authorized personally. I isolated one transaction. High six figures. Destination account ending in 7731. Authorization code digitally mirrored from my old civilian login. He cloned my credentials. I stared at the screen. This wasn't sloppy fraud. This was a planned burial. I initiated a secure capture. All files mirrored to classified DoD evidence storage. Metadata preserved. Chain of custody established. Mitchell thought he built a safety net. He built a paper trail. And Cassidy thought she signed a mercy order. She signed confirmation of motive. The last transfer on the ledger flashed across my screen. Transfer confirmed. The letters glowed red against the dark interface. For a second, the hospital room felt colder. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I made a decision. If they wanted me erased quietly, they should have checked who they were trying to bury. I closed the laptop halfway, then reopened it. This wasn't just financial fraud anymore. It was conspiracy, attempted murder, federal liability manipulation, and possibly foreign financial entanglement. I forwarded preliminary findings to Arrington's secure channel. Subject line: domestic threat assessment. He replied in under a minute. Proceed. I saved the final screenshot of that red confirmation banner because nothing motivates like proof. The glowing red transfer confirmed text lingered on my screen. And in another part of the city, red wine was being poured into crystal glasses at my parents' Sunday dinner. I kept my left arm close to my body as I walked up my parents' front steps because it still felt like it didn't belong to me. Not pain exactly, more like a reminder that I'd been opened up, repaired, and sent back out with unfinished business. Their house looked the same as always. Manicured shrubs, perfect porch light, a welcome mat that said blessed, which was funny in the same way a live, laugh, love sign is funny when you've watched people ruin each other over money. Through the window, I could see the Sunday dinner setup. Candles, cloth napkins, wine glasses that only came out when my mother wanted to feel like she was in a lifestyle magazine. They thought I was gone. Not dead exactly. Cassidy had been careful about that. She told them I was in a clinic recovering, confused, not ready for visitors. Convenient words that kept them from asking questions and kept them from looking too closely at how quickly my recovery turned into absence. I didn't knock. I opened the door and walked in. The dining room went silent so fast it felt staged. My father froze with a fork halfway to his mouth. My mother's smile collapsed into a stiff line. Cassidy stood near the counter holding a wine glass mid-pour like she was hosting a fake cooking show in her own head. Mitchell was seated like he owned the place, which in his mind he did. Cassidy's wine glass slipped out of her hand. It hit the hardwood and shattered. Nobody moved to clean it up. My mother's hand flew to her chest. "Brooke!" I didn't answer right away. I let them sit with the reality of me standing there, pale, thinner, but upright. No wheelchair, no dramatic limp, just me. Cassidy's mouth opened, then shut again. Her face did something I can only describe as internal math going wrong. Mitchell recovered first. He always did. He had that salesman reflex where panic turns into performance. "Brooke," he said, standing up slowly, palms out. "Wow, this is unexpected." I looked at him. "I get that a lot." My father finally found his voice. "Where have you been? Cassidy said you were in bad shape." Cassidy stepped forward quickly like she could physically block the conversation. "You shouldn't be here," she snapped, too sharp for a concerned sister. Then she caught herself and softened her tone. "You're not thinking clearly." I walked closer to the table. I'm thinking fine. My mother's eyes darted over me. Honey, are you okay? I am alive, I said, which is surprising considering someone signed a do not resuscitate order for me. The room went colder. My father blinked. A what? Cassidy shook her head immediately too fast. That's not what happened. Mitchell jumped in. Brooke, you were in critical condition. The doctors recommended. No, I said, still calm. Doctors don't recommend a DNR for a healthy 29-year-old with a treatable injury. Someone requested it. Cassidy's eyes hardened. You're being hysterical. That word, hysterical, it was like she pulled it out of a family emergency kit. Right next to ungrateful and dramatic. My mother tried to smile. It came out shaky. Sweetheart, maybe you misunderstood. Cassidy was trying to help you. She was scared. Cassidy nodded like my mother had handed her a script. Yes, I was terrified. I didn't want you to suffer. I looked at my parents. Did you question it? My father frowned. Question what? The decision, I said. Did you question why she refused surgery? My mother's face tightened. Cassidy said it was hopeless. I nodded slowly. So you believed her, my father bristled. Brooke, don't start this. We've all been through a lot. That was rich. I'd been through a windshield. They'd been through an awkward dinner. Mitchell cleared his throat. Let's all calm down. Brooke, we actually needed to talk to you about some medical paperwork. Just routine stuff. He moved toward the kitchen with practiced casualness. He picked up a folder from the counter, thick with documents. Cassidy watched him, then looked back at me with forced innocence. It's just release forms for your care so the doctors can coordinate. I knew exactly what it was. I'd already seen the structure. Liability attachments, corporate guarantees, a clean little bow that would tie all his illegal debt to my name permanently. I followed Mitchell into the kitchen because I wanted him away from my parents. They were useless in a crisis, but I didn't need them watching what was about to happen. The kitchen smelled like roasted chicken and expensive candles. My mother's idea of comfort. Mitchell's idea of stage lighting. He shut the swinging door behind us. His smile dropped. Sign these, he said, pushing the folder toward me. I didn't reach for it. No, his jaw tightened. Brooke, you don't understand the situation. I understand it perfectly. He leaned closer. You've been through trauma. You're not stable. You're lucky Cassidy even protected you. I stared at him. Protected me from what? Life-saving surgery? He tapped the folder hard. These are medical releases. If you don't sign, you're going to create problems. For who? I asked. His eyes flicked just once, micro-expression. Fear. Then he covered it with anger. For everyone, he snapped. Do you want your parents dragged into bills? Do you want Cassidy blamed for decisions doctors made? I kept my voice even. You want my signature because you need my name to hold your mess. His face went still. That silence told me everything. He tried again, slower. Brooke, you don't want to fight this. You're not well. People know you had a head injury. There it was, the threat. I raised an eyebrow. Say it. He exhaled sharply. If you don't sign, I can make a call. I can have you evaluated, institutionalized. You're clearly confused. He stepped in close and grabbed my injured shoulder with his hand. Not hard enough to leave a bruise, just hard enough to hurt, just hard enough to remind me he thought I was weak. The pain flashed bright and clean, and something in my body answered before my brain finished the sentence. Muscle memory training. I rotated my torso, took his wrist with my good hand, and redirected his grip into a joint lock so fast he didn't even understand what happened until his knees hit the hardwood. No punches, no shouting, just leverage and anatomy. Mitchell made a strangled noise that tried to become a yell and failed halfway. His free hand slapped the floor. His eyes bulged. Brooke, he wheezed. I kept the pressure steady, enough to control, enough to teach. His face went red, then pale. I leaned down close to his ear, my voice low and flat. Cayman Islands routing number 7821, account ending 7731. His breathing stopped for a second. That number wasn't public. It wasn't guessable. It lived in a place you only saw if you'd peeled back every layer he thought was safe. His body started trembling under my grip. I continued calmly. The IRS is the least of your problems, Mitchell. I released him and stepped back. He stayed on his knees, clutching his wrist like it was the last honest thing he'd ever held. Sweat ran down his temple. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. In the dining room, I could hear muffled voices. My mother asking if everything was okay. Cassidy trying to laugh too loudly. I didn't bother fixing the tone of the moment. I walked back through the kitchen door, past the broken glass still on the floor, and toward the front entry. Cassidy watched me like she expected me to explode or beg or collapse. I did none of that. I looked at my parents once. You let her speak for me when I couldn't, I said. That's all I needed to know. Then I left. Behind me, through the closed door, I heard Mitchell's ragged, panicked breathing, short, sharp pulls like he was trying to inhale his way out of a nightmare. And somewhere down the street, that frantic sound blended into another one rising fast in the dark. A police siren. Loud, aggressive, getting closer. The siren got louder behind me as I pulled onto the main road, and I smiled a little because my sister has always loved calling for backup when she's the one holding the knife. I didn't go home. I don't keep home in one place anymore. I drove to a bland shopping plaza on the edge of town, the kind with a nail salon, a sandwich shop, and a pharmacy that never has enough staff. It was well lit, public, and full of cameras. If someone wanted to get cute, they'd have to do it in front of witnesses. I parked far from the doors and sat for a second with both hands on the wheel, not to calm down, just to think. Mitchell wasn't going to sleep after what happened in the kitchen. I'd seen the look in his eyes when I whispered that routing number. That wasn't anger. That was the kind of fear that makes people start making phone calls. Cassidy would be right beside him, trying to turn fear into a plan, because panic is the one emotion she's willing to share with a man. I checked my mirrors. Nothing obvious. I stepped out of the car and started walking toward the pharmacy like I had a normal life and normal errands. That's when I noticed the first cruiser parked at an angle near the entrance. Engine running. Deputy inside watching the lot. Then a second one rolled in, slow, deliberate. Then a third. I stopped walking and turned slightly enough to see the full parking lot reflection in the pharmacy windows. 4 cruisers, and they weren't here for shoplifters. I didn't move toward them. I didn't run. Running is what guilty people do, and I wasn't going to reward a bad script. 2 deputies stepped out with their hands on their holsters. Then another pair. Then someone shouted, "Sheriff's Department, hands where we can see them." People turned and stared. A woman with a paper bag froze like this was a free show. A teenage kid started recording on his phone because America has taught its youth 2 things. Don't talk to strangers and always film the strangers. I raised my hands slowly, palms out, calm, visible. Another voice barked, "Turn around, face away from us." I complied, not because they owned me, but because I didn't need to argue with men who had already decided I was dangerous. Let them burn their energy. I had plenty of time. Boots moved closer on the pavement. Radios crackled. Subject is standing. No weapons visible. Approach with caution. Possible 5150. Possible violent 5150. So that was the play. Mitchell's connections weren't political or high level. He didn't know senators. He knew administrators, the kind of people who will sign anything if you promise them a donation plaque and keep their name off the news. I kept my hands up while the lead deputy circled into my peripheral view. He was tall, mid-40s, the kind of guy who looked like he lifted just enough to feel confident. He spoke like he'd already practiced the lines in his head. "Ma'am," he said, "we received a report. You're a danger to yourself and others. We're going to take you in for evaluation." I didn't look at him yet. "Who filed it?" "Your family," he said. "Your husband." I cut in, still calm. "I don't have a husband." His eyes narrowed like my marital status was less important than the fact I'd corrected him. He stepped closer. "You've been in an accident recently." "Yes." "And you've been acting erratic." "No," he signaled to someone behind him. I heard a faint click like a syringe cap or a restraint buckle. "Ma'am," he said, voice harder, "get on the ground now." That's when the trap fully showed itself. This wasn't a polite welfare check. This was an attempted disappearance with paperwork attached. Sedate me, label me unstable, lock me up, and let Mitchell clean his ledger while I'm wearing grippy socks and arguing with a therapist about whether my sister loves me. It would have worked on the version of me Cassidy thinks exists. I lowered myself to my knees slowly, careful with my injured shoulder. I didn't need to prove anything. The goal wasn't to win a parking lot standoff. The goal was to redirect it. The deputy kept talking. "Hands behind your back." "I'm going to reach into my jacket," I said evenly. His voice snapped. "Don't you move." "I'm going to reach into my jacket," I repeated. Same tone, no rush. "If you want your people to go home tonight without paperwork, you're going to let me finish this motion." That got his attention. Not because I sounded tough. Because I sounded certain. He lifted his weapon slightly. "Last warning." I moved anyway, slowly, with 2 fingers like I was pulling out a library card. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and took out a credential case. I held it between 2 fingers and set it on the pavement in front of me. "Pick that up," I said. "Scan it." He hesitated. A deputy behind him muttered, "What is that?" "It's not a weapon," I said. "It's a problem solver." The lead deputy crouched, grabbed it, and flipped it open. Gold chip credential, DoD Alpha clearance. The kind of identification that doesn't ask permission. It gives instructions. His face changed instantly. Not confusion, recognition. His radio chirped again, and he didn't answer it. He stared at the credential like it had bitten him. "Stand by," he said quietly to his team. Then he looked at me and his voice dropped a full octave. "Ma'am," he said, I need to confirm this." "Go ahead," I replied. "Scan it." He pulled out his scanner, hand suddenly clumsy. The little device beeped once, then his face drained of color so fast it was almost impressive. He straightened up, lowering his weapon like gravity had doubled. "Yes, ma'am," he said. His voice cracked on the second word. A deputy near him whispered, "What is it?" The lead deputy swallowed. "It's federal." That word hit the air like a door slamming. The other deputies lowered their weapons in a chain reaction. One of them took a step back like he was afraid he'd accidentally trespassed into a classified area. The lead deputy leaned forward, returning my credential case with both hands like it was delicate. "I apologize," he said. You received a fraudulent report," I said, "and you responded aggressively." "Yes, ma'am." I stood up slowly, steadying my shoulder. I didn't glare. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Authority doesn't yell. It redirects. "Deputies," I said, looking at the group, "secure your weapons. You work for me tonight." Every single one of them froze. Then the lead deputy nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." Across the street, I saw the SUV parked in the shadows near the edge of the lot, pretending it belonged there. Cassidy sat in the passenger seat, her face lit by the dashboard glow. Mitchell was behind the wheel. Cassidy's posture was rigid, like she was watching her own plan get run over in slow motion. I met her eyes through the windshield. She couldn't hear me from that distance, but she read my mouth anyway when I said, "Nice try." Mitchell's head snapped around, scanning the lot like he was looking for an exit that wasn't there. Cassidy didn't move. She just stared because for the first time, she understood something she'd avoided her entire life. She hadn't tried to commit her sister. She had tried to commit a high-ranking federal officer. The deputies began shifting into a new formation, waiting for instructions, while the parking lot lights reflected off the cruisers and turned the pavement into a spinning wash of blue and red. And that blinding swirl dissolved into flashing strobe lights at a high society charity gala. The strobe lights hit my eyes the second I stepped out of the car. And for a moment, I wondered if this was a fundraiser or a nightclub for people who hate music but love tax write-offs. The venue was one of those places built to intimidate normal people. Marble out front, valet line, a red carpet that always looks like it's trying too hard. Inside, everything smelled like money and perfume, and the kind of confidence you only get when you've never had to explain yourself to anyone. Cassidy loved places like this. She could breathe here. She could pretend her life was earned. A banner over the entrance read, "Vance Medical Charity Gala." Beneath it, in tasteful gold script, "Helping patients, changing lives." That made me laugh under my breath, quietly to myself, because I'd seen the ledgers. Mitchell wasn't changing lives. He was billing dead ones. Tickets were $1,000 a plate, 300 guests, plus sponsorship packages, plus silent auction items donated by people who wanted their names on something shiny. It wasn't charity. It was laundry. Mitchell and Cassidy were burning their last clean social bridge while converting stolen funds into respectable donations. The kind that make prosecutors sigh because juries love a guy who helped sick kids. They planned to disappear after this. I didn't know the exact date yet, but I knew the pattern. You don't host a big flashy gala when you're stable. You do it when you're cashing out. Private security stood at the entrance with earpieces and bored eyes. They scanned tickets and watched for people who looked like trouble. I walked straight past them, not because I looked important. I was in plain clothes, hair down, minimal makeup, no jewelry. I looked like the kind of person they'd ignore at their own event. I bypassed them because I had the venue's master override code. It took 30 seconds to get it. Mitchell's office had paid the same security vendor for years. Same firmware, same lazy password structure. People like Mitchell think money replaces competence. I tapped the access panel, entered the code, and the door unlocked like it was happy to betray them. Inside, the ballroom was packed. White tablecloths, centerpieces that looked like they'd been approved by a committee, a string quartet playing something polite enough to be ignored, waiters gliding around with trays of champagne. And there they were, Cassidy in a floor-length dress that probably cost more than my first car, Mitchell in a tux with a smile that could sell a defective pacemaker. They stood near the stage, shaking hands, posing for photos, basking in the attention like it was sunlight. Cassidy was talking to a woman with a necklace big enough to qualify as shoulder armor when she spotted me. The change on her face was immediate. Not fear first, embarrassment. Fear came second. She recovered quickly, though. Cassidy always did in public. Private panic is her hobby. Public control is her religion. She leaned toward Mitchell and said something fast. Mitchell's smile stiffened for half a second, then returned even brighter, like he could blind people into forgetting reality. Cassidy moved toward the stage with purpose, grabbed the microphone from the MC like she owned it, and turned to face the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, voice warm and practiced. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we have a bit of an unexpected situation." The room quieted. 300 heads turned, hungry for drama but pretending to be above it. Cassidy's eyes locked on me. "This is my sister," she announced, and the way she said it made it sound like a diagnosis. "She was recently in a serious accident and suffered a brain injury. She's been unstable, confused." A few guests murmured, the kind of sympathetic noise that costs nothing. Cassidy continued smiling like she was doing charity in real time. "We've been trying to get her proper care, but she sometimes wanders off. If security could please escort her out so she doesn't hurt herself, I'd really appreciate it." There it was, not help her, remove her, make it look compassionate, make it look necessary. 2 security guards started moving toward me. I didn't step back, I didn't rush the stage. I didn't do anything dramatic. I just stood there and looked at Cassidy. She smiled harder like she was winning. Mitchell watched me closely, not with confidence, with calculation. He knew enough now to suspect I wasn't bluffing. He just didn't know what I had loaded. A guard reached for my arm. I lifted my hand slightly, not to stop him, just enough to signal don't touch. He hesitated. I tapped my earpiece. One word. "Execute." The string quartet stopped mid-note like someone had unplugged reality. Every large display screen around the ballroom flickered once, then went black. People laughed nervously. Some clapped thinking it was part of the program. Cassidy's smile faltered. She glanced at the AV booth, irritated like she was about to complain to a manager. Then the screens lit up again, not with the gala's logo, with bank records. High definition, cleanly formatted, impossible to dismiss. Mitchell's company name, Medicare payment streams, equipment billing codes, patient IDs, facility names. Then highlighted in red, payments tied to oncology departments, cancer patients. The room made a small sound like a collective inhale. Cassidy turned, staring at the screens, her mouth slightly open. Mitchell's face drained. He took a half step back like he expected the screens to bite him. The audio came next. A file began playing over the main speakers, clear as if Cassidy herself was holding the mic again. Her voice from the ER waiting room the night of my crash. "Just sign the DNR, Mitchell. With her out of the way, we get the $300K and the feds blame her for the fraud." For a moment, nobody moved. 300 wealthy people frozen in place, processing what they just heard. Then the room reacted the way humans always do when the mask drops, a horrified gasp. Not polite, not controlled. A real one. Someone near the front whispered, "Oh my God." Someone else said louder, "Did she just?" A woman at a table looked like she might vomit. A man in a tux took his wife's hand and stepped away from Cassidy like she was contagious. Cassidy stood on the stage with the microphone still in her hand, but she wasn't holding it anymore. It was just there, dangling from her fingers like her brain forgot what objects were for. She tried to speak. Nothing came out. The mic slipped. It hit the stage with a sharp thud. Mitchell turned toward the exit, eyes wide, breathing fast. He was already plotting his escape, not his defense. His escape. Cassidy's social world collapsed in about 10 seconds. Not because people suddenly grew morals, because people like her don't tolerate risk in their circles. They'll forgive cheating. They'll forgive lying. They'll forgive anything that doesn't threaten them. But attempted murder and cancer fraud, that's not scandal. That's exposure. Cassidy's mouth moved again, searching for words that could fix this. There weren't any. I stayed where I was, calm, watching the room reshape itself around truth. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to chase her down the aisle. The crowd did the work for me. Phones came out. People backed away. Whispers turned into accusations. A man near the stage pointed at Mitchell and said, "You stole from patients." Mitchell flinched like he'd been hit. Cassidy looked at me with something that wasn't anger anymore. It was disbelief, like she couldn't accept that the version of me she invented didn't exist. I tapped my earpiece again, quieter this time. Package complete. And as the room's collective horror swelled into a louder, uglier noise, Mitchell made his move. He grabbed Cassidy's arm, yanked her off the stage, and shoved through the crowd toward the exit. The horrified gasp of 300 people rose and rose until it morphed into the screech of tires ripping out of the venue's parking lot. The tires screamed like Mitchell was trying to outrun sound itself, and I didn't chase him because I don't do street races for closure. I watched their tail lights disappear from the gala entrance, then turned and walked out the side exit like I just finished a normal event where nobody confessed to murder on a sound system. My earpiece was quiet for half a second. Then my comms tech came through in a low voice. "Targets are mobile, heading east, speeding." "Let them," I said. "They're going where we want." Because Mitchell had one predictable trait besides arrogance. He trusted his office more than any person. He'd built it like a bunker disguised as a corporate suite. Glass walls, smart locks, security cameras, and a private elevator. He thought it made him untouchable. It just made him trackable. A block away, I stepped into an unmarked SUV. No lights, no sirens, just a driver and a quiet interior that smelled like black coffee and government-issued patience. We didn't follow close. We didn't need to. Their car was already tagged. Mitchell hit the freeway, weaving through traffic. Cassidy's phone was probably blowing up with texts from people who had smiled at her 5 minutes earlier. Now they'd be demanding refunds, offering prayers, and forwarding screenshots to prosecutors. Mitchell's phone call log lit up too. His partners, his lenders, his lawyer, anyone who might build him a bridge out of the mess. But bridges cost money, and Mitchell was out of clean money. They took an exit toward his corporate office. The building sat in a business park with perfectly trimmed landscaping and plenty of cameras. It looked safe, quiet, the kind of place that pretends crime can't happen because everyone wears a badge at the front desk. They pulled into the underground garage at high speed. The barrier arm snapped up after reading his plate. Inside the SUV, my comms tech updated me. "They're in the garage." "Good," I said. Mitchell and Cassidy ran to the private elevator. He used his keycard. It beeped green. They ascended to the executive floor like they were escaping into the clouds. In the security feed, Cassidy's hands were shaking now. Mitchell's weren't. Not yet. They burst into the glass-walled suite and flipped on lights. The office was sleek and expensive like a catalog designed to convince people he was legitimate. Leather chairs nobody sat in. A bar cart that only existed for photos. A massive desk like an altar. Mitchell went straight to a hidden wall panel. His fingers moved fast, tapping a code. A compartment opened, duffel bag, cash bundles, encrypted hard drives in foam casing. Cassidy grabbed the bag and started shoving cash inside like it would erase the audio recording. "Where are we going?" she hissed. Mitchell tossed hard drives into a second bag. "Somewhere without extradition." Cassidy's voice rose. "You said this wouldn't happen." Mitchell snapped. "I said you needed to shut up and smile." That was the closest thing to honesty he'd ever given her. He grabbed a folder from his safe. Passport stash. Backup IDs, a printed charter itinerary, private runway, midnight departure. The kind of plan you make when you've already accepted you're not staying. Cassidy looked around wildly. "They'll come here." "They don't know where we are," Mitchell said, too confident, too quick. He stuffed the folder into the bag and headed for the exit door. His hand hit the wall button to unlock it. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. Nothing. He swiped his keycard. Red light. Mitchell frowned, confused. "What?" Cassidy rushed to the door and yanked the handle. It didn't move. Mitchell tried the elevator call panel. The screen was dead. Then the building made a sound. Low, mechanical, like something big waking up. Steel shutters started sliding down over the floor-to-ceiling windows. At first, Mitchell just stared like the office was redecorating without permission. Then the shutter slammed into place with a deafening crash. The glass disappeared behind thick metal. The room dimmed, not dark, just trapped. Cassidy backed up, clutching the duffel bag. "Mitchell!" He ran to the wall panel and started typing faster now. The system rejected him. His fingers trembled for the first time. He tried his phone, no signal. He tried the landline, dead. He pulled his laptop from the desk and hit the power button. It booted, then immediately displayed a single message across the screen. Access revoked. Mitchell's face tightened like someone had yanked his spine. He spun toward Cassidy, almost angry at her for being there. "What did you do?" she whispered. Mitchell didn't answer because he couldn't. He knew. This wasn't a random malfunction. This was a hostile takeover. Miles away, I sat in a mobile command center, watching the suite from 6 angles. My laptop displayed the building's security architecture like it was a map of a familiar neighborhood. Smart locks, HVAC, elevator controls, power routing, camera loops. Mitchell paid for all of it. He just didn't pay for anyone competent to protect it. I'd initiated a full cyber lockdown the moment his car entered the garage. Not a hack in the movie sense. A clean override, legal, logged, coordinated, a trap built out of his own toys. My comms tech looked at me. Shutters deployed. Locks are sealed. Targets contained. I nodded once. Bring them home. Outside Mitchell's building, the ground began to vibrate. Not from police cruisers, from aircraft. Stadium-grade floodlights snapped on and blasted through the suite's metal shutters, leaking in through the seams. The office filled with harsh white lines like the building itself was being interrogated. Mitchell stepped back, eyes wide. Cassidy made a small noise in her throat like her body didn't know what to do with fear that big. Then the sound hit. 2 Blackhawks hovered close to the building, rotors hammering the air. The walls trembled. Loose papers lifted off the desk and fluttered like panicked birds. Mitchell shouted something I couldn't hear through the feed, but I saw his mouth form a word that looked like no. The hallway outside the suite lit up with motion. Operators, fast, armored, coordinated. General Arrington was there, too. He wasn't in full dress uniform this time. He wore a tactical jacket and the expression of a man who doesn't negotiate with people who tried to profit off his officer's death. The suite door blew inward with a controlled charge. Smoke rolled across the floor. Mitchell stumbled backward, raising his hands too late, too dramatically. Cassidy screamed. The JSOC operators flooded in, weapons up, voices firm. "Hands, hands on the ground!" Mitchell tried to speak. He tried to bargain. I saw it on his face. The salesman instinct. One operator yanked him down hard and zip-tied his wrists. Cassidy fell to her knees, clutching the duffel bag like it was a life raft. Arrington stepped into the room and looked around once. "Where is the evidence?" he asked. Mitchell stammered. "This is a misunderstanding." Arrington didn't even glance at him. 2 operators grabbed the hard drive case. Another grabbed the passport folder. The money bag hit the floor and split slightly, cash peeking out like it was embarrassed to be there. Then the operator stepped aside and I walked in. I wasn't in plain clothes. I was in my Class A uniform. Pressed clean, silver oak leaves on my shoulders catching the floodlight like a warning label. Cassidy's head snapped up. Her face went slack. Not just shock, humiliation. Because her entire story about me, sickly, broke, unstable, collapsed under the weight of a uniform she couldn't argue with. I walked to her at a normal pace. No drama, no speeches. I held out a folder. Federal warrant, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, treason. Her eyes dropped to the words like they might change if she stared hard enough. "They said you were a translator," she whispered, voice shaking. "I am," I said. "I translate lies into consequences." That was the closest thing to a joke I gave her, and it landed because it was true. I placed the warrant in her trembling hands. Mitchell tried to lunge forward, but an operator slammed him back down. Cassidy looked up at me, tears forming, not from remorse, but from the sudden loss of control. "I didn't," she started. I cut her off quietly. "You signed the DNR. Everything after that is just paperwork catching up." An operator stepped in and pulled her hands behind her back. The handcuffs clicked shut with a sharp metallic ratchet. Cassidy flinched at the sound like it was louder than the helicopters. Mitchell was breathing hard, panicked chest rising and falling in fast bursts. He looked around the room like he still expected someone to rescue him. Nobody was coming. The operator tightened Cassidy's cuffs one more notch. That ratcheting sound echoed in the suite. And somewhere else, in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and consequences, it would become the heavy thud of a judge's gavel. The judge's gavel hit once, and Mitchell's face finally did what his mouth had been doing for years. It stopped working. He'd tried everything. He wore the right suit. He hired the right attorneys. He sat very still and looked very sorry whenever a camera pointed his way. He even tried the charitable angle like the gala was some tragic misunderstanding and not a cash rinse with live music. None of it mattered once the hard drives were decrypted. Once the Medicare fraud became names and dates and patients. Once the offshore transfers became routing numbers and signatures and deliberate choices. Mitchell Vance was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. No early exit fantasy, no country club prison jokes. Real time, real consequences, the kind of sentence that turns a man's confidence into silence. Cassidy didn't get to hide behind him either. She was indicted as an accessory to attempted murder and fraud, facing up to 15 years plus civil liability that would follow her like a shadow. And her favorite punishment wasn't even the court. It was social. Her country club friends erased her the way they erase bad press. One week she was Cassidy, the perfect hostess. The next week she was some woman they met once. People who had toasted her at the gala suddenly couldn't remember her last name. That's how status works. It's not loyalty, it's a rental agreement. My parents didn't fare any better. Arthur and Diane Sterling had quietly invested their entire retirement fund into Mitchell's growth opportunities. They believed his fake wealth the way people believe a salesman when they're desperate to feel chosen. When the shell companies collapsed, so did their savings. The house equity was tied up. The accounts were drained. The credit lines were maxed. The reality they had avoided for years finally showed up with a calculator. 2 months after the lockdown, they had nothing. No retirement, no safety net, no Mitchell to brag about, no Cassidy to hide behind. Just bills, eviction notices, and a cold understanding that their golden child had been standing on rotten floorboards the whole time. Which is how they ended up outside the military base visitor center. I saw them through the glass doors before I stepped out. They looked smaller, not physically exactly, more like the world had stopped making space for them. My father's shoulders were slumped. His hair had gone more gray in a short amount of time. My mother clutched a handbag like it was the last thing that proved she used to belong somewhere nice. They weren't dressed for a dinner party. They were dressed for survival. When I pushed the door open, they stood up too fast. My mother's face crumpled immediately. Tears came out like she'd been holding them back for weeks. My father's eyes were red, but he tried to keep his voice steady. "Brooke," he said, and the way he said my name sounded like he was testing whether it still worked. They rushed toward me, not cautiously, not respectfully, like they were drowning and I was a dock. My mother grabbed my hands. "Oh, honey, we didn't know," she cried. "We didn't know who you were." "We didn't understand." My father stepped closer, voice thick. You're a major." He said it like it was both an apology and a winning lottery ticket. "Brilliant major," my mother added, as if praising me now could rewrite the past. They looked up at me with the same expression they used to give Mitchell when he walked into a room wearing a nice suit. Admiration mixed with need. My father cleared his throat. "We need your help." There it was. Not "we're sorry," not "are you okay?" Help. My mother squeezed my hands harder. "We're in trouble. We've lost everything. The house. They're going to evict us." My father jumped in quickly like he'd rehearsed. "We made a mistake. Mitchell convinced us. We didn't know he was doing anything illegal." You thought he was rich," I said. He flinched. My mother's tears intensified. "Please, Brooke, you have influence, you have a salary, you have connections." She glanced past me toward the base gates like she expected someone important to step out and salute me. My father nodded, desperate. "You can make a call. You can help us delay the eviction just until we get back on our feet." I stood still. I didn't pull away. I didn't hug them. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at them. And for a moment I saw exactly what they were. Not evil, not monsters. Worse, weak people who worshipped appearances. They weren't begging because they understood what they'd done. They were begging because the illusion had finally stopped paying rent. My mother sniffed, trying to regain control. "We're your parents." I tilted my head slightly. "You were." My father's face tightened. "Brooke, don't do this." Family is family. I let a small pause hang there. Not dramatic, just enough to make the words feel heavy. "You watched her sign my death warrant to save a few bucks," I said evenly. "And you said nothing." My mother opened her mouth, but nothing came out. My father tried. "We didn't think. You chose the illusion because it wore a nice suit," I continued, voice calm, precise. "Now live in the ruins of it." My mother's hands loosened on mine. Her face shifted from pleading to disbelief like she couldn't accept a world where tears didn't work. My father's jaw clenched. "So you're just going to abandon us?" I looked him straight in the eye. "You already abandoned me. You just did it quietly so you wouldn't feel like the bad guy." My mother took a step forward again, panic returning. "Brooke, please." I stepped back, not aggressively, just enough to create distance. Behind me, the base gate stood tall and impersonal. Cameras, guards, biometric checkpoints. A world built on clear rules and clear consequences. A world where people didn't get to rewrite reality because they were upset. General Arrington was waiting a few yards away, speaking with 2 members of my unit. They weren't hovering. They weren't watching my parents like a threat. They were just there, steady like the ground. My mother's voice cracked. "Where are we supposed to go?" I didn't answer that because the truth was simple. Anywhere that wasn't my responsibility. I turned away from them without hesitation. No dramatic last look, no speech, just a choice. I walked toward the biometric gate. The scanner read my clearance, a soft beep. The lock released. As I stepped through, I heard my father call my name again, louder this time, like volume could change my decision. It didn't. I kept walking. Arrington glanced at me. "You good?" "Yes, sir," I said. He nodded once and we moved forward together. Behind the gate, my unit was waiting. People who knew exactly what I was, not what they wished I was. People who didn't mistake a uniform for worth because they'd earned theirs, too. I didn't feel triumph. I felt something cleaner. Final. When I reached the inner security line, the gate behind me closed with a heavy mechanical thud. On the other side of it, Arthur and Diane Sterling stood in the cold alone, finally forced to face a life without borrowed status. And I didn't look back. When everything was over, court dates scheduled, sentences handed down, headlines fatting, I finally had space to think. Not about revenge, about clarity. The hardest part of this entire situation wasn't the accident. It wasn't the DNR. It wasn't even hearing my own sister's voice on that recording, calmly negotiating my death like it was a bad investment she needed to cut loose. The hardest part was realizing how easy it was for them. Cassidy didn't hesitate. My parents didn't question her. Mitchell didn't flinch. No one slammed a fist on a table and said, "This feels wrong." That's when I understood something I wish more people talked about. Betrayal rarely looks dramatic. It doesn't come with thunder or evil laughter. It comes wrapped in concern. It sounds reasonable. It hides behind phrases like, "We're just trying to make the best decision." When my sister signed that DNR, she didn't say, "I want her dead." She said she wouldn't want to suffer. She made it sound compassionate. That's how real betrayal works. It doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like management. The first lesson I learned is simple. Loyalty is not blood. It is behavior under pressure. Anyone can smile at you when things are comfortable. Anyone can post family photos and toast at holidays. But when money, status, or fear enters the room, that's when loyalty shows up or disappears. My parents didn't betray me loudly. They betrayed me quietly. They believed the version of reality that protected their lifestyle. They chose the illusion because it was easier than questioning the golden child. And silence in moments like that is a decision. If you take anything from my story, take this. The person who says nothing while you're being harmed has chosen a side. The second lesson was more personal. Never let people define you by the version of you that benefits them. In my family's mind, I was the struggling translator, the quiet one, the fragile sister. That narrative made them comfortable. It allowed Cassidy to shine. It allowed my parents to feel superior. It allowed Mitchell to underestimate me. A lot of people stay trapped in roles assigned to them years ago. The irresponsible one, the dramatic one, the difficult one. And when they start growing, the people around them get uncomfortable. Because if you're not small anymore, someone else has to adjust. I didn't waste time arguing about who I was. I built something stronger in silence. Credentials, clearance, competence, structure. Here's what I learned about revenge. Real revenge is not screaming. It's preparation. It's documentation. It's understanding systems better than the people trying to manipulate them. When Mitchell tried to bury me under his fraud, he didn't expect me to read the architecture of his scam. When Cassidy tried to label me unstable, she didn't expect me to hold federal authority in my pocket. They underestimated me because they defined me. And that's a mistake you should never make about yourself. If you are in the middle of your own family drama right now, if someone is manipulating finances, rewriting history, or trying to make you look unstable, do not respond with noise. Respond with information. Read the documents. Check the accounts. Keep records. Ask questions even when people tell you you're being difficult, especially then. Most people who get trapped in situations like mine don't lose because they're weak. They lose because they trusted blindly. Trust is not a substitute for verification, and charisma is not competence. Mitchell looked successful. He sounded confident. He dressed the part. That's all it took for my parents to hand him their retirement. Confidence without integrity is just marketing. Another lesson I had to accept was this. Forgiveness and access are not the same thing. I don't walk around angry. I don't wake up thinking about my sister's face in that ICU hallway. Anger is heavy. I prefer efficiency. But forgiving someone internally does not mean you give them another opportunity to hurt you. You can release resentment without reopening the door. That distinction matters. There's also something else I need to say clearly. Cutting off family is not dramatic. It's strategic. We are taught that blood is permanent. That family deserves unlimited chances. That loyalty means endurance. But loyalty without boundaries becomes self-destruction. When my parents stood outside that base and asked me to save them, they weren't asking for reconciliation. They were asking for rescue. And I had already been their collateral once. I won't be again. You are not obligated to sacrifice your stability to repair someone else's denial. Another truth that took time to accept. Sometimes the problem isn't that you're weak. Sometimes the problem is that you're the only one who sees the truth. In many family stories, the person who questions things becomes the troublemaker. The one who asks about finances becomes paranoid. The one who pushes back becomes emotional. That label is often a defense mechanism. If they can make you doubt yourself, they don't have to confront their own choices. Don't let anyone shrink you to protect their comfort. Build quietly. Learn systems. Protect your name. Protect your documentation. Protect your future. And when the moment comes, you won't need to scream. You'll just need to stand. This wasn't just another entry in a collection of revenge stories. It wasn't just a dramatic headline about a family collapsing under greed. It was a reminder that family stories are not always warm and soft. Sometimes they are contracts and consequences. Sometimes family drama wears designer clothes and speaks politely. But here's the part that matters. You are allowed to outgrow the version of you that benefits other people. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to choose structure over sentiment. And if someone ever miscalculates your value, don't rush to correct them. Let them find out the quiet way. When people hear a story like mine, they usually focus on the spectacle. The helicopters, the courtroom, the gala screens lighting up with evidence. It sounds cinematic. It fits neatly into the category of revenge stories people binge late at night because it feels satisfying. But if that's all you take from this, you miss the point. This was never about humiliation. It was about accountability. There's a difference. Revenge that feeds your ego burns fast. It's loud. It's emotional. It feels powerful for about 5 minutes. Justice built on structure lasts. If you see yourself anywhere in my story, if you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, financially manipulated, or labeled unstable when you started asking the right questions, I need you to hear this clearly. You are not crazy for wanting clarity. You are not dramatic for wanting transparency. And you are not disloyal for protecting yourself. A lot of family drama doesn't start with shouting. It starts with paperwork, with subtle control, with someone saying, "Don't worry, I'll handle it." And quietly putting your name on something you didn't agree to. So here's the first thing I want you to apply in real life. Protect your documentation. Keep copies. Read before signing. Check what your name is attached to. Do not assume that shared DNA equals shared integrity. If I hadn't reviewed my own LLC records, I would have walked straight into federal charges that weren't mine. The system wouldn't have cared that my sister didn't mean it like that. Systems care about evidence. You should, too. Second, don't confuse forgiveness with access. You can forgive someone internally so that you're not carrying anger around like a weight vest. That's healthy. But forgiveness does not require you to reopen the door. It does not require you to consign loans again. It does not require you to share bank accounts, passwords, or vulnerabilities. It definitely does not require you to ignore patterns. Patterns matter more than apologies. If someone consistently benefits from your silence, that's not a misunderstanding. That's a structure. And structures don't change because you cried in the kitchen. They change because you removed access. Third, build a chosen family. That phrase gets overused, but let me explain what it really means. Your chosen family is made up of people who show up when there's nothing to gain. Not when there's a gala. Not when there's a spotlight. Not when there's money on the table. But when things are complicated and inconvenient. My unit stood by me not because we share blood, but because we share standards. That's the difference. Standards create trust. Blood alone does not. If your biological family respects you, that's a gift. If they don't, you are allowed to find community elsewhere. You are not required to shrink yourself just to stay invited to dinner. There's another uncomfortable truth I need to say. Sometimes the person labeled unstable in a family is the only one reacting to something that is actually wrong. When Cassidy tried to have me committed, she counted on a familiar tactic. Discredit the person who sees through you. It works more often than people admit. If you are being painted as emotional, irrational, or difficult simply because you are asking questions, pause. Ask yourself, who benefits from me doubting myself? That question alone can change your life. The goal is not to become cold or paranoid. The goal is to become informed. Informed people are hard to control. Informed people don't panic when someone raises their voice. Informed people know when to step back and when to press forward. If there's one mindset shift I want you to carry from this, it's this. Stop trying to win arguments. Start building leverage. Arguments are emotional. Leverage is structural. When I exposed Mitchell and Cassidy, it wasn't because I shouted louder than they did. It was because I had receipts, real ones. And here's the final thing I learned. You don't owe anyone a version of yourself that makes them comfortable. Not your parents, not your siblings, not anyone who benefits from underestimating you. If someone thinks you're weak, let them think it. If someone thinks you're incapable, let them think it. Use that time to build quietly. The most powerful position you can be in is underestimated and prepared. This story might sit among other family stories on the internet. It might get labeled as one of those intense revenge stories people click on for drama, but I hope you see it as something else. It's a reminder that family drama doesn't excuse bad behavior. It doesn't cancel consequences, and it doesn't require you to sacrifice your future just to keep the peace. Peace without boundaries is not peace. It's surrender. They thought I was the weakest person in the room. They were wrong. Don't let anyone miscalculate your value.